I want to start today with a bit of a provocation for you. We usually think of colonial cities in the Americas as the sort of start of history. You know the narrative. A rugged explorer shows up, plants a flag in the ground, and boom, year one.
Right. Year one.
But when it comes to the city we're looking at today, which is Lima, Peru, that date, 1535, is basically a cover-up.
It's a very convenient fiction, isn't it? I mean, we love a clean timeline. But you're right. If you think Lima started with the Spanish, you're missing the foundational layer of the entire story.
And I mean layer, literally. We're doing a deep dive into Lima today, but we're going to treat the city like a geological formation, almost like a layer cake. Because beneath the modern traffic jams and beneath the colonial balconies of the Spanish, there is this massive, sophisticated indigenous machine that was running the show long before Pizarro ever showed up.
It's a machine that actually dictated exactly where the Spanish could even build. We tend to think of cities as static things sitting on dirt. But Lima is a series of superimpositions. It's one civilization literally pouring itself over the previous one and sealing it in.
So let's grab a shovel and start digging. Our mission for this deep dive is to uncover the engineering that turned a desert into a garden, look at the chessboard strategy of the conquistadors, and see how this city survived everything from massive earthquakes to revolutions.
That's quite a ride.
It really is. But first, we have to look at the map. Before the Spanish arrive, we are in the Valley of the Rimac. And it's not exactly a lush tropical paradise, is it?
No, not at all. And that's the first misconception to clear up. I think people picture Peru and they think jungles. And it has those, sure, but the coast, it's a gray, arid desert. It almost never rains.
Right.
In that kind of environment, power isn't about gold or land. It's about one thing: water control.
Because if you control the tap, you control the people.
Precisely. Before 1535, this wasn't just empty sand. The indigenous population had essentially terraformed the valley with a massive system of acequias.
Acequias being canals.
Yeah, canals. They were hydraulic masters. They took water from the Andes and routed it through the desert to create these incredibly fertile pockets for orchards and fruit trees.
So when the Spanish arrive, they aren't finding a blank slate at all. They're finding a fully operational utility grid.
Exactly. And the person running that grid is the first character we need to meet today, a man named Talachusco. He was known as the Old.
Talachusco. Okay, so what's his job title? Is he a mayor? A king?
He was a Yanacuna. That's essentially a high-level administrator or a steward for the Inca Empire.
Okay.
Fun fact, he was actually a former servant of the Inca leader Huayna Capac's wife. And he ruled the valley along with his son, Coachinamo, or possibly his brother. The records are a bit hazy. But the point is, the Inca Empire was massive and distant, on the ground right there in the Rimac Valley. Talachusco was the guy holding the keys to the water distribution.
He ran the life support system.
He and his family did, yes.
Now, here is where the story gets a little suspicious to me. The standard history says Francisco Pizarro shows up with his horses and his steel, and Talachusco just welcomes him. Open arms, gifts, come on in. I have a hard time believing a local ruler just hands over the keys to the kingdom without a fight. Was this genuine hospitality?
You're definitely right to be skeptical. It wasn't just warm hospitality. It was a tactical alliance. It was realpolitik.
Because the Inca Empire was already falling apart. Really.
Exactly. It was fracturing under civil war and disease. Talachusco was a survivor above all else. He likely looked at these new, heavily armed strangers and thought, if I ally with them, I might maintain some stability, keep my position. If I fight them, I'm done.
The enemy of my enemy is my friend, or my useful tool.
Right. But it was a massive miscalculation on his part, because Pizarro didn't just want an alliance. He wanted total replacement. And this brings us to what I think is the most symbolic act of the entire conquest. Pizarro needed a place to live, right? A governor's palace.
Let me guess. He didn't build it on an empty lot.
He built his residence, which, by the way, is still the government palace of Peru today. He built it directly on top of Talachusco's home.
Wait, directly on top? That is incredibly aggressive.
It's aggressive, but it's also strategic genius. Think back to the water. Talachusco's house wasn't just a home. It was the central node for the main canal intake from the river.
Oh, I see. He didn't just steal the guy's house. He stole the waterworks.
He seized the mechanism of life. By taking that specific house, Pizarro physically took control of the valley's agriculture and its people. It sends a very clear message. I am the provider now.
And what happened to everyone who was living there? The people who built those canals?
Displaced. They were pushed out to these areas called doctrinas, which were essentially relocation camps like Santa Maria Magdalena, just to clear out space for the new City of the Kings.
Which, by the way, I always assumed was named after the King of Spain. City of the Kings seems like standard sucking up to the monarch.
Well, absolutely, it sounds like it. But it is entirely wrong.
So it's not the King of Spain?
No, it's a calendar reference. Pizarro got the confirmation that this site was viable on January 7th, 1535. In the Catholic calendar, that's the Feast of the Epiphany.
Ah, the Day of the Three Wise Men.
Exactly, the Three Kings.
Oh, it's the City of the Three Wise Men. That is a great cocktail party fact.
It really is.
But why here? I know the original capital was a place called Jauja. Why move the whole operation to Lima?
Geography is destiny. Gauja is beautiful, but it's deep in the central Andes. It's very high altitude.
Right.
Horses struggle there, Europeans get altitude sickness, and most importantly, it's weeks away from the ocean. Spain was a maritime empire. They needed to ship gold out and bring military reinforcements in from Spain. They desperately needed a port. Lima is flat, it's coastal, and it's right next to Callao, which is this perfect natural harbor. It was purely a logistical decision.
So they have the location, they have the water, now they have to actually build the city. And looking at the early maps and the sources, this does not look like a city that grew organically over time. It looks like a spreadsheet.
Yes. It's known as the Damero de Pizarro, Pizarro's checkerboard.
Ah.
This rigid urban planning was actually mandated by Emperor Carlos V, a strict grid of 117 blocks.
And I'm guessing that wasn't just for aesthetics.
Not at all. It's not designed for beauty. It's designed for military surveillance and architectural hegemony.
How so?
Think about line of sight. In a medieval European city with winding, narrow streets, rebels can hide. It's chaotic. In a grid, you could put a cannon at an intersection and control 4 streets at once. It's military architecture.
That makes total sense. And at the center of this grid is the Plaza Mayor.
The theater of authority.
Right, because you have the cathedral, the city hall, or cabildo, and the government palace all facing each other around this one square.
It creates an enclosed universe where church and state are manifesting their power constantly. And just like Pizarro taking Talachusco's house, this is part of a broader pattern of domination. You see it across the Americas.
The superimposition again?
Exactly. The sources mention Cholula in Mexico, or the Cortacancha in Cusco, where the Spanish built churches directly atop indigenous sacred sites. It sends a subliminal and sometimes very literal message of dominance.
It's not enough to defeat the culture. You have to physically sit on top of it.
Right. And you see that transition in the infrastructure, too. The bridge connecting to the Rimac district started as a woven, wicker, indigenous bridge. But by 1610, they replaced it with a permanent stone bridge.
Which is still there today, right?
Still connecting the city today. It's all about cementing permanence. But the funny thing about trying to build permanent stone structures in Lima is that the environment doesn't always cooperate.
Because the ground literally shakes. We can't talk about Lima's architecture without talking about earthquakes.
No, you really can't. The seismic shifts forced an architectural evolution.
And the turning point was the massive earthquake of 1746.
Total devastation. That earthquake changed everything. The builders, like this fascinating Austrian Jesuit named Juan Rare, they realized that the heavy, rigid stone structures they used in Europe were basically death traps in the Ring of Fire.
So they had to invent something new, or adapt something old.
They adopted an indigenous technique and refined it. It's called quincha. It's a frame of wood and cane packed with mud and plaster.
Wood, cane, and mud. That doesn't sound very structurally sound for a mansion.
But it's incredibly flexible. When the ground shakes, quincha dances. It doesn't crack and collapse like heavy stone. They use cedar and quincha for the upper structures.
So those massive, imposing colonial mansions you see in photos of Lima, are they fake?
In a way, yes. It's a style we call Baroque Limeño. The bottom floor might be adobe or stone, but the upper floors are this light, flexible birdcage of cane and mud. But then they would plaster it and paint it to look like heavy stone. It's a disguise. The exterior looks heavy and plain, but the interiors were incredibly opulent, like the famous choir stalls carved by Pedro de Noguera.
It's a survival mechanism disguised as wealth. And speaking of disguises, let's talk about the balconies. The sources call them the aerial streets.
The balcons. These totally defined colonial Lima. Because the streets were crowded, dirty, and a bit dangerous, the elite lived on the second floor. These enclosed wooden balconies jutted out over the street.
They'd look almost like confessionals hanging off the side of a building.
That's a brilliant comparison. They allowed you to see without being seen. You could spy on your neighbors, watch the religious processions, see who was meeting whom, all while sitting in the shade. It was a city of voyeurs.
It sounds incredibly paranoid, everyone watching everyone else, but nobody wanting to be exposed.
And that paranoia wasn't just social, it was institutional. Because while the elite were peeking through the slats of their balconies, the church was watching everyone.
Which brings us to the subterranean terrors. This is the dark flip side to those airy balconies.
The Inquisition. The Tribunal of the Holy Office was established in 1569. Their explicit job was to root out heresy, blasphemy, and anything that threatened the socio-religious order. And they operated largely underground.
The details in the sources regarding this are gruesome. The damp, cold, underground cells.
It was psychological terror reinforced by extreme physical torture. The outline mentions one specific horror-pouring acid into the eyes of the accused.
That is horrific.
It is. And there's a museum there today, actually, in those same subterranean spaces. But it serves as a reminder that this orderly, grid-planned city of kings was held together by profound fear.
It's such a sharp contrast, because upstairs you have the University of San Marcos, founded on May 12, 1551. It's the oldest continuously functioning university in the Americas.
Pumping out the intellectuals.
Right. Contrast the horror of the Inquisition with the rise of intellect. San Marcos had faculties for theology, law, specifically canons, and medicine. Its whole purpose was to churn out the bureaucrats, lawyers, and priests needed to run this massive empire.
That's the duality of the colonial capital. High intellect and deep brutality. And we have to remember, all of this, the university, the balconies, the Inquisition, all of it was funded by a completely rigged economy.
This was the part of the research that really blew my mind, the trade monopoly. I knew Spain controlled trade, but the actual logistics described in the sources sound like a nightmare.
It was wildly inefficient, but highly profitable for Lima. For over 200 years, during this golden age of commerce from 1535 to 1776, Lima was the only legal port of entry for South American trade.
Wait, let's unpack that for a second. If I'm a Spanish settler living in Buenos Aires on the Atlantic coast and I want to buy a shovel from Spain,
You can't just have a ship sail straight to Buenos Aires. That's strictly illegal.
so what route does my shovel take?
Well, the shovel leaves Spain and sails to Panama. Then it gets unloaded. It has to be carried by a mule train through the fever-infested jungles across the isthmus. Then it gets put on another ship on the Pacific side and sails down to Callao.
Just to get to Lima.
Right. Then it gets sold to a Lima merchant, who marks up the price, naturally. Then it gets put on another mule and trekked all the way over the Andes Mountains, across the continent, to finally get to you in Buenos Aires.
That shovel must have cost an absolute fortune.
The markup was insane. Goods were incredibly expensive.
But this is exactly why the Lima merchant elite became fabulously wealthy. They were the gatekeepers of a continental bottleneck.
It's a captive market.
Completely captive. And they didn't just have a connection to Spain. The Callao port gave them a global connection to the Philippines. Lima was a global depot.
At least until the map changed. Which brings us to the era of fractures, post-1776.
Right, the year the bubble finally burst. The Spanish crown realized the system was just too crazy to sustain and created the viceroyalty of the Rio de la Plata in Buenos Aires. Suddenly, trade shifted to the Atlantic.
And Lima loses its monopoly.
Overnight, the wealth dried up. Combined with the massive costs of the 1746 earthquake reconstruction and a decline in mining and textile productivity, Lima's power really faded. And this weakness sets the stage for the shift to a republic.
Yes. Lima goes from being this ultimate royalist stronghold to the seat of the republic. Independence is declared in 1821.
Led by the liberator José de San Martín and his expedition of 1820. But there's a detail in the source material about his military strategy that is just fascinating. The crossing of the Andes.
Ah, yes. The famous strategy to cross the Andes and surprise the royalists.
The notes point out that this was originally an idea by a British officer.
It was originally drafted as a potential British conquest plan.
Why on earth was the British military drafting invasion plans for Peru?
Think back to your expensive shovel in Buenos Aires.
Ah.
The British were the world's leading manufacturers at the time. They despised the Spanish trade monopoly. They wanted to sell their goods directly to South America without the Spanish middleman. So they drew up contingency plans to break that monopoly by force if they had to.
So the fight for freedom and independence happened to align perfectly with the British desire for new customers.
Exactly. The liberators adopted the plan. Freedom is rarely free of economic interests.
Okay, so independence happens. The Spanish are out. But the violence doesn't stop. We have to jump forward a bit to the War of the Pacific, 1879 to 1883.
This is a pivotal moment that really reshaped the geography of the city we know today.
The outline mentions the heroic cities.
Right. Today, if you visit districts like Miraflores, Barranco, or Chorrillos, you see upscale neighborhoods, beautiful ocean views, luxury restaurants. But during the War of the Pacific, these were separate towns outside the city center, and they became the absolute front lines against the Chilean occupation.
The Chilean army was advancing on Lima.
Yes. And the civilians and hastily assembled militias in these districts offered incredibly fierce defense. The fighting was house by house. After the defeat, the invading troops burned Chorrillos and Barranco to the ground.
So when they are officially called heroic cities, it's not just an honorary title.
Not at all. It's because the modern districts are built literally on the ashes of that defense. The urban sprawl of Lima eventually expanded and swallowed these towns, turning them into neighborhoods. But that scar of destruction and rebuilding is a core part of their DNA. It's yet another layer of the cake.
Which brings us back to the present day. And I think the modern synthesis of all this is really perfectly captured by one specific image from the sources. The Huaca Pucllana.
Oh, it's a perfect symbol.
For you listening, we should define what that is. What is a huaca?
A huaca is a sacred site. It can be a temple, an oracle, a place of immense cultural power in the Andean world. The Huaca Pucllana specifically is a massive adobe pyramid. It was built by the pre-Inca Lima culture roughly 1,500 years ago.
And where is it today? Is it out in the desert somewhere?
No, that's the amazing part. It's right in the middle of Miraflores. You can sit at a high-end restaurant eating world-class ceviche and look out at a mud pyramid that has stood there since before the fall of Rome. It's entirely surrounded by modern apartment buildings and office towers.
That is the ultimate layer cake right there. The ancient indigenous sacred site, surrounded by the colonial footprint, wrapped in a modern metropolis.
Its resilience in physical form. From indigenous canals to colonial balconies to Republican plazas, they are all coexisting in the same space.
It really challenges the way we look at cities. We drive to work, and we just assume the pavement is the ground floor.
But in Lima, it's glaringly obvious that the pavement is just the roof of the previous civilization.
It makes you wonder what invisible foundations we are completely oblivious to in our own lives.
That's exactly the thought I'd leave you with. If you're listening to this on your commute tomorrow or just walking down your street, look down. If you can peel back the pavement of your own capital, what would you find?
Whose sacred sites are we driving over? Whose engineered water systems are buried under the Starbucks?
We are usually just the latest tenants in a very, very old building.
We certainly are. And that's it for this deep dive into the hidden layers of Lima. Thanks for exploring it with us.
Thanks for having me.